When I look back at my life, I sometimes wonder how I managed to come out of it all still standing. At 28, I've lived through more family drama than most people would in a lifetime. My childhood is a blur in many ways, but I do remember the warmth of my father's presence, his deep laughter, the way he'd toss me in the air and catch me like I weighed nothing. But those memories are like old photographs, fading a little more with each passing year. He died when I was 5, and after that, life moved at a speed I could barely keep up with. Within a year, my mother remarried. Her new husband, my stepfather, wasn't a bad man. He wasn't particularly affectionate, but he treated me well enough during the 10 years he was in our lives. But when I was 15, he and my mother divorced, and suddenly, everything shifted. My mother never had to worry about money, because his alimony checks were enough to keep us comfortable. But that didn't stop her from reminding me, over and over again, that my real father had left us with nothing. I was too young to question it at first, too naive to see the manipulation in her words. She would sigh dramatically when bills arrived, casually mentioning how lucky we were that my stepfather had provided for us. And then, she'd always add, "Unlike your father, who didn't leave us a single penny." It became a script, one I knew by heart. What she didn't realize was that I knew something she didn't. The house we lived in? It wasn't hers. It never had been. It had belonged to my dad's parents, and when I turned 18, my grandfather, who had always been quiet but kind, transferred the deed to my name. I'll never forget the way my mother reacted when she found out. "Tracy, what are you planning to do with the house?" she had asked, her voice too controlled, her eyes locked on me with a sharpness I had never seen before. I had been so young, so eager for her approval, that I hadn't even hesitated before saying, "Nothing. You and Emma can keep living here like always." The relief on her face should have been my first clue. The way she hugged me, as if I had just saved her life, should have been my second. But I was desperate to believe she truly cared, that her love for me wasn't conditional. I wanted to believe that, for once, I had done something that made her proud. So I buried myself in school, determined to carve out a future of my own. I worked tirelessly, earned a full scholarship to college, and landed an internship through sheer determination. My mother didn't acknowledge my efforts, but I had stopped expecting her to by then. Meanwhile, my half-sister, Emma, took a very different path. At 21, she still treated college like an inconvenience, a chore that interrupted her social life. And yet, despite my own struggles, despite everything I had worked for, I was the one funding her education. Because, according to my mother, it was my duty. It was supposed to be just another routine family dinner. Every Tuesday, I went back to the house, my house, though I never brought it up, for what my mother called family time. It was always the same. Mom complaining about something insignificant, Emma scrolling through her phone, and me sitting there wondering why I still bothered. That night, I barely had a chance to take off my coat before Emma burst into the living room, practically vibrating with excitement. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," she squealed, bouncing on her heels like a child on Christmas morning. I blinked at her. "Emma, what?" "Jake proposed," she blurted out, shoving her left hand in my face. A delicate diamond ring sparkled under the ceiling light. It took me a second to process what she'd just said. Jake, our neighbor. I had known him for years. A decent guy, polite, hardworking. I had nothing against him, but my heart twisted at the timing. Only a month ago, I had caught my own boyfriend cheating. I had ended things immediately, but the betrayal still stung. And now, here was Emma, beaming, gushing about her future husband, while I was still trying to piece myself back together. I forced a smile.
"Wow, Emma."
"Congratulations." "I know, right?" She twirled her ring for dramatic effect before plopping onto the couch. "I don't even care about school anymore. This is way more important." I frowned. "Emma, education is—" "Oh, honey, this is wonderful news," Mom interrupted, clasping her hands together. "We need to start planning immediately." Emma giggled, already lost in wedding fantasies. "I was thinking of booking the country club, but there's also that gorgeous new venue downtown." "A country club wedding? That sounds expensive." I kept my voice neutral, but I was already uneasy. Mom waved a dismissive hand. Oh, don't be so negative. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Emma grinned. We'll need at least 200 guests. And white doves. Lots of them. And an ice sculpture. Mom added as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I sat there, watching them spiral deeper into their extravagant fantasies, throwing out ideas that sounded more like something from a royal wedding than a modest family gathering. I felt the familiar, suffocating weight settle on my chest, that feeling of being the only adult in the room. I should head home, I said abruptly, standing up. I have work in the morning. Neither of them really noticed. They were too busy debating whether the cake should be 4 tiers or 5. As I drove back to my apartment, that unease stayed with me. Emma was impulsive, always had been. Mom was an enabler, always would be. I had spent my entire life being roped into their decisions, manipulated into their version of family duty. And something told me this wedding was only the beginning of a much bigger problem. A week passed since Emma's big announcement, and while I hadn't forgotten about the wedding insanity, I told myself I was probably overreacting. Maybe they'd come to their senses. Maybe they'd planned something reasonable. Then my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice had that tone, the one she used whenever she was about to ask for something big. Tracy, honey, can you come over? We need to have a serious talk. I sighed. What is it now? Just come, sweetheart. It's important. I knew better than to ignore her, so after work I drove to the house. Again, my house, though I never called it that out loud. The second I walked through the door, I knew I was in trouble. Emma was already there, practically vibrating with excitement. In front of her was a thick binder, stuffed with magazine clippings, fabric swatches, and what looked like a novel's worth of notes. Before I even sat down, she launched into her grand vision. So, I planned everything out perfectly, she gushed, flipping through pages covered in extravagant wedding ideas. The venue I want has this amazing garden with a fountain, and they do this thing where they release hundreds of white doves right after the ceremony. My stomach clenched. That sounds expensive. Emma barely acknowledged my concern. Oh. And I found the perfect band. They played at a celebrity's wedding last year. Isn't that amazing? I tried to keep my voice neutral. Emma, did you set a budget for any of this? Of course, she chirped and proudly handed me a sheet of paper. The moment my eyes landed on the numbers, my heart nearly stopped. The venue alone cost more than my annual rent. The doves, the band, the premium catering, the ice sculptures, the designer dress. It was insane. Are you joking? I blurted out, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. Emma snatched the paper back and frowned. No? Why would I be joking? I let out a short laugh, one that wasn't remotely amused. Emma, this is more than some people spend on a house down payment. That was when the waterworks started. Her face crumpled, and within seconds, she was sobbing. You're just jealous, she wailed. Jealous because your boyfriend cheated on you, and now you're alone. Tracy, Mom snapped, glaring at me like I was the villain. How dare you upset your sister like this? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Look, I've already been helping a lot. I'm paying for Emma's college, her living expenses, even her clothes. Mom cut me off with a scoff. Oh, here we go. Now you're going to throw that in her face? That's what family does, Tracy. We help each other. You're just fulfilling your duties as a big sister. I stared at her, stunned. Duties? I repeated. Mom, I have been financially supporting Emma for years while she refuses to take anything seriously. And now you're asking me to fund a luxury wedding? Do you even hear yourselves? You can afford it. Emma shot back, her tears miraculously drying as she crossed her arms. You make good money now. That doesn't mean I have to spend it on this. Emma's eyes darkened, her lips curling in frustration. Then she threw out the line I should have seen coming. Fine, I'll ask Daddy instead. Her words hit like a slap, but I kept my expression blank. Emma had always referred to my stepfather as Daddy, even though he hadn't been in her life for years. It was her last-ditch effort to make me feel replaced, to make me feel like I was the bad guy. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. I'm not paying for this wedding, I said firmly. Emma exploded. You selfish scum, she shrieked, practically stomping her feet like a toddler. I hope you die alone. I slammed the door behind me, but not before I heard my mother's voice, soft and soothing. Don't worry, sweetie. Your sister has always been difficult. We'll figure something out. Of course she would. Because in this family, Emma was always the victim. And I was always the villain. For 2 whole weeks, my life was blissfully quiet. No calls from Mom, no guilt trips, no Emma throwing tantrums. For the first time in years, I actually got to focus on my work without being dragged into their endless drama. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and nearly did a double take. It was my stepfather. We hadn't talked in a while, but we had always maintained a decent relationship. Curious, I answered. Tracy, got a minute? His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it. Of course. What's up? He let out a dry chuckle. Your mother and Emma came to see me. I sighed, already knowing where this was going. Let me guess. They asked you to pay for Emma's wedding. Oh, they did more than ask, he said, his tone laced with amusement. They showed me the budget. Tracy, I nearly fell out of my chair. White doves. Ice sculptures? A celebrity band? What the hell are they thinking? Despite everything, I laughed. For the first time in weeks, I actually laughed. Welcome to my world. Emma's never worked a day in her life, he continued, exasperated. She's still in college, which, by the way, I found out you're paying for. And now she wants a wedding that costs more than my first house. Yep. And your mother had the audacity to act like this was normal? Oh, she didn't just act like it was normal, I said, shaking my head. She made it sound like it was my duty to fund it, like I owe them. My stepfather sighed. I told them absolutely not. Emma may be my daughter, but I'm not going to encourage this entitled behavior. If she wants a wedding, she can get a job and pay for it herself. For the first time since this entire fiasco started, I felt seen. So, I'm not crazy for thinking this is absurd? I asked, half joking but also needing to hear it from someone else. Not even a little, he reassured me. Tracy, you've done more than enough. Your mother and Emma have taken advantage of you for years. It's time for them to grow up. Hearing those words from him, someone who had been in our family for a decade, made something inside me loosen. I had spent so much of my life feeling like the unreasonable one, the selfish one, just because I had boundaries. But now I knew I wasn't alone in seeing the truth. We talked for a little while longer, sharing our frustrations, laughing at the absurdity of it all. And when I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt validated. A week after my conversation with my stepfather, I had almost convinced myself that the worst was over. They had exhausted all their options, or so I thought. Then, one evening, just as I was settling in after a long day at work, there was a knock at my door. I knew. Even before I opened it, I knew. And sure enough, there they were, my mother and Emma, standing outside my apartment like 2 saleswomen with a pitch I didn't want to hear. Tracy, sweetheart. Mom's voice was sugary sweet, which meant trouble. We've been thinking, and we realized you were right. The wedding budget was a little high. A little? I asked dryly, crossing my arms. Emma stepped forward, smiling way too brightly. So, we made some adjustments. She thrust a new piece of paper at me. Look, we cut down the guest list, canceled the doves, even found a cheaper band. I hesitated before glancing at the paper. The numbers were still outrageous. Sure, they had shaved off some expenses, but the cost was still more than I made in an entire year. Emma, this is still ridiculous. Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. It's way better than before. And now you don't even have to pay for the whole thing, just a portion. I let out a slow breath, already feeling my patience slipping. Emma, I already told you. I'm not paying for this wedding. Oh, we know, Mom chimed in. That's why Emma has a brilliant solution. Emma beamed. You can take out a loan. For a second, I thought she was joking. But the way she looked at me, so casual, so expectant, made my blood boil. Alone? I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. It makes perfect sense. Emma chirped. You wouldn't have to pay it all at once, just small payments over time. It's totally manageable. Yes. Mom nodded eagerly. Think about it, Tracy. With your salary, the payments wouldn't even be that bad. I stared at them, stunned into silence. They weren't just asking me to help, they were asking me to go into debt for them. And that was my breaking point. I took a deep breath, then stepped aside and pointed at the door. Get out. Emma's smile vanished. What? You heard me, I said, my voice sharp. Get out. Tracy, honey, Mom started, but I cut her off. I'm done. I'm done with the guilt trips, the manipulation, the constant expectation that I owe you something. I am not taking out a loan. I am not paying for this wedding. And from now on, I am done being your personal bank account. Emma's face twisted in rage. You're so selfish. I hope you die alone. Mom gave me her signature disappointed look. I really thought I raised you better than this. But I didn't care anymore. I held the door open. Goodbye. And for the first time in my life, I slammed the door on them, literally and figuratively. A month passed, and for the first time in years, my life felt quiet. No calls from Mom, no Emma showing up with another ridiculous request, no exhausting guilt trips. I had finally put my foot down, and it felt good. Then came Aunt Sarah's birthday. Aunt Sarah was one of the few people from my father's side I still kept in touch with. She had always been kind to me, the only real family I had left. Skipping her birthday wasn't an option, even though I knew exactly who would be there. Sure enough, the moment I walked in, I felt the tension thick in the air. Mom and Emma were already there, huddled in a corner, whispering and shooting me daggers with their eyes. I ignored them and went straight to Aunt Sarah, forcing a smile. Happy birthday, I said, wrapping her in a tight hug. Sweetheart, she whispered back, squeezing my hands. I heard about everything. Are you okay? I nodded, but I could feel the weight of Mom and Emma's stares. The next hour was awkward but manageable. I caught up with cousins, dodged Mom's icy glare, and tried to enjoy myself despite the obvious tension. But then, during dinner, the moment I should have seen coming arrived. Mom stood up, raising her glass. I'd like to say something, she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I knew that voice. That voice meant trouble. Sarah, you have always been such a wonderful sister-in-law, she continued. Always putting family first. Unlike some people here. The room went silent. You understand the importance of helping loved ones, Mom went on, her eyes locked onto me like a predator. It just breaks my heart when I see children grow up to be so selfish and ungrateful after everything their mother has sacrificed for them. I clenched my jaw, my hands shaking under the table. Some of us raise our children with love, support them through everything, and in return, we get nothing but disrespect, she added, her voice thick with forced emotion. I had had enough. I pushed my chair back, the sound screeching against the floor. The whole room was staring, waiting. You want to talk about being ungrateful? I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning inside me. Let's talk about the truth then. Since you seem to have forgotten. Mom's face stiffened, but I wasn't stopping now. That house you live in? It's mine. My grandfather left it to me, not you. You've been living there for free while I've been paying all the bills. Gasps rippled through the room. And Emma? I turned to my sister, who was already blinking back tears. I've been paying for her college, her clothes, her expenses, everything. And you still had the audacity to ask me to take out a loan for her wedding. Emma burst into tears, right on cue. How dare you? Mom's face was red with rage. I gave birth to you. I raised you. And this is how you repay me. I let out a bitter laugh. Repay you? For what, Mom? For years of guilt-tripping me? For using me like a personal ATM? For making me believe I owed you something just for existing? Mom was shaking now, her hands curled into fists. You're worthless. You've always been selfish, just like your father, she spat. And that was it. The final straw. I took a deep breath and straightened. You have 2 weeks, I said coldly. 2 weeks to move out of my house. After that, I'm getting lawyers involved. The room was dead silent. Emma sobbed harder. Mom's mouth fell open. I turned to Aunt Sarah, who looked sad but understanding. I'm sorry for ruining your birthday, I said softly. I'll call you later. And then, without looking back, I walked out. As I stepped outside, I heard Mom screaming behind me, but for once, I didn't care. I had finally freed myself. The morning after Aunt Sarah's party, my phone started buzzing. At first, I ignored it, but by the time I checked, I had over a dozen missed calls and even more unread messages, all from Mom. Tracy, please. You can't do this to us. I didn't mean what I said. I was just upset. Where are we supposed to go? You're being ridiculous. It was the same cycle as always. Pleading, guilt-tripping, manipulation. Then came the calls from everyone else. My cousin Mark was the first. Tracy, I get that you're upset, but you can't just throw your own mother out on the street. Watch me, I said and hung up. Aunt Linda tried a softer approach. Sweetie, your mother's not perfect, but she's still your mother. Think about what your father would have wanted. That one stung, but I stayed firm. Dad would have wanted me to stop being manipulated. And don't bring him into this. You all kept the truth about the house from me for years. I blocked Mom's number, but she kept finding ways to reach me, through relatives, through fake accounts, even through my work email. I had no choice. I called a lawyer. Mr. Reynolds was direct and to the point. After looking through the paperwork, he reassured me. Legally, you're in the right. The house is yours, and you've been covering all expenses. Your mother might try to claim tenant rights, but given that she's never paid rent or contributed financially, she doesn't have a strong case. So, what's the next step? I asked. We serve her with a formal eviction notice. You gave her 2 weeks. That's already generous. I signed the papers, and we set a date to visit the house. When the day came, I wasn't surprised by what we found. Mom was on the couch, crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Emma was pacing, red-faced, practically foaming at the mouth. This is illegal. Emma screamed when she saw us. You can't just kick us out. Mr. Reynolds, ever the professional, remained calm. Mrs. Johnson, Miss Emma, you are being legally evicted. You are welcome to challenge this in court, but I should warn you that the case will not be in your favor. The costs would be substantial. Mom switched tactics instantly. Her voice softened, her face crumpled in practiced heartbreak. Tracy, honey, she whispered, standing up. Please. We're family. We've been through so much together. I know I've made mistakes, but you don't really want to do this, do you? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who had spent years controlling me with guilt. But this time, it didn't work. I do, I said simply. Emma let out a furious shriek. You're a monster. I hope you rot alone. I turned to leave, my lawyer following behind me. For the first time in my life, I was done. A month passed and life moved on. The house was finally mine, empty, quiet, and free of the chaos that had once consumed it. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Then Aunt Sarah called. Just thought you'd want an update, she said, her voice laced with something between amusement and exasperation. Your mother and Emma moved in with Jake. I nearly laughed. Of course they did. I could only imagine how that went. Emma playing the helpless victim, Mom spinning some dramatic tale about how her cruel daughter had thrown them into the streets. And Jake? Poor, oblivious Jake, who probably thought he was just being a supportive fiancé. But a few weeks later, I got another call, this time from a number I didn't recognize. Tracy, please don't hang up. I froze. Jake. He sighed. Yeah. I know this is unexpected, but I need to talk to you. I hesitated. If this is about Emma, it is. But not in the way you think, he cut in. I ended the engagement. That caught me off guard. What? You were right about them, he said, his voice tired. I didn't see it at first, but after they moved in, everything changed. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. At first, I felt bad for them. Your mom kept talking about how she was betrayed by her own daughter, and Emma played the part of the heartbroken little sister. But then I started noticing things. Like what? I asked. Like the fact that they never once offered to contribute to bills, he said bitterly. Emma refused to get a job, said she was too stressed about the wedding to focus on anything else. And your mom? She kept saying you'd come around eventually, that you'd feel guilty, and send them money. I exhaled sharply. That sounds about right. But the final straw? His voice darkened. I caught them going through my personal paperwork, bank statements, investment accounts, everything. They were trying to figure out how much they could get me to spend on the wedding. I shouldn't have been surprised. But somehow, hearing it from Jake, seeing how it had played out for him, made it even more surreal. I confronted Emma about it, he continued. And want to know what she said? I already knew. That you were being selfish, just like me. He let out a bitter laugh.
Exactly.
That's when I knew. I couldn't marry someone like that. For the first time in a long time, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of validation. Jake, I said after a moment, I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I'm glad you saw the truth. Yeah, he muttered. Me too. As I hung up, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I had made the right choice. For once, I had chosen myself. It didn't take long for things to fall apart. A week after Jake ended the engagement, I got another update, this time from Aunt Sarah. Your mother and Emma got kicked out of Jake's house, she said, not even trying to hide the amusement in her voice. They're staying with Grandma now. I nearly laughed. Of course, they had latched onto the next available option. Grandma was old and soft-hearted, exactly the kind of person Mom could manipulate. Emma, meanwhile, had completely given up on pretending to have ambition. She dropped out of college, declaring that she was too emotionally drained to continue. That was my cue to make things official. I had my lawyer draft a formal letter, notifying them that all financial support for Emma was done. No more tuition payments, no more covering her expenses. Mom left me a hysterical voicemail. You're ruining Emma's future. You're a horrible sister. Do you even have a heart? I blocked her number. The guilt trips kept coming through extended family, but I shut them down one by one. I was done. For the first time in my life, I was truly putting myself first. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez. She helped me unpack everything I had been carrying for years. The grief, the guilt, the manipulation. Your mother conditioned you to believe that love had to be earned, she told me. That your worth was tied to how much you gave. But that's not love. That's control. It was something I had always felt but had never been able to put into words. One afternoon, Aunt Sarah invited me over. She handed me an old photo album. These are pictures of your dad, she said gently. I thought you should have them. I flipped through the pages, my chest tightening. My father as a young man, smiling at the camera, holding me as a baby, laughing with my grandfather. For years, Mom had weaponized his memory, made me believe he had left me nothing. But as I looked at those photos, I realized something. He had left me something after all. His family, his kindness, his integrity. And I had almost let Mom take that from me. That night, I started looking at real estate listings. Maybe it was time to sell the house. Start fresh. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. Tracy. Emma's voice cracked.
Please.
I messed up. Jake left me. I have nowhere to go. 6 months ago, I would have caved. Would have given in. Instead, I took a deep breath. I'm sorry you're having a hard time, Emma. I hope you figure things out. Then I hung up, blocked the number. And for the first time in my life, I felt free.